Hi everyone, Dr. Lewis here. So, this is one of our final lectures for the semester, actually, called Censorship in Music. So, we just got done talking about protest and rebellion and the poetry of Anna Akhmatova, as well as nonviolent protest groups operating in the time of Hitler and Stalin. So, what I like to do is discuss other genres that are also kind of in a moment of flux and rebellion at this time. So, specifically, we're going to talk about music and the history of censorship. So, music is something that's been restricted historically as well. And our example for this week is called Bone Records. And I do have a short video clip that just lets you actually hear what a bone record sounds like. If the videos are not working for you in the actual slideshow, some of them, it just depends on your version of PowerPoint. I also have these linked on our website. So either way, if you can get it to work in here or if you can get it to work on D2L. But going back to bone records, as our reading for today explains, are in this time, there's certain types of music that is basically banned or heavily censored. To a certain extent, even having this music can get you kicked out. That it can get you thrown in jail. It can get you a citation. It can put you under suspicion. And so what people did, because people not only love freedom, but also art is a form of that, is they started taking medical waste from dumpsters, essentially. And with this medical waste, they're actually able to fashion records to take this music and to be able to listen to it, even when it is something that's banned. So these bone records, they are basically exchanged with people who are, it's almost like a drug deal. In a back alley, you might exchange these records with people. And I think that this is a very important part of history because, again, it's not something that you always get in a history book, but at the same time, this is kind of a beautiful image of humanity kind of holding on to something that makes them human, humanity rebelling, and also the importance that music has for people because this is something that could get you thrown in jail and people still did it. Um, so that is our example for today. And again, this short video below has a couple of examples of what it sounded like, as well as some historical context in order to accentuate the reading that we had yesterday, or complement, I guess would be a better word. So bone records mostly happened in the USSR in the 60s, some in the 50s too, but mostly in the 60s. And this is something that's happening in many countries, that many genres of music are banned, censored, controlled, challenged, or even just disregarded as dangerous or trash. Music is a particularly touchy subject matter, and part of what I want to discuss is why. What does music do for us for people? What power does music have? Why is music this center of controversy and discussion and banning and censorship, and it could get you thrown into jail? Rock and roll is actually exploding at this time as well, and that was again in many different countries, not only over in Russia, but also in England and America. That this was considered a very controversial subject matter, a very controversial art form in music. So it is an interesting time period, I will say that. So I have two videos coming up that are anti-rock and roll clips. They are mostly from the 50s and 60s. So watch through these clips and say exactly what are the concerns raised. What are the common themes or patterns that you notice? Why are people speaking out against rock and roll? And as a content warning, there is some language in these clips. I'm not going to play them and make you sit through the lecture watching them with me, but play them on the PowerPoint, or again, they are linked on D2L as well. Okay, so this is the first one with obviously Elvis, who my mom liked quite a bit. She was in that age. This is the next clip with our Youth on the Loose start. And then finally, I have an anti-Beatles Soviet PSA that has a lot of the same, in like 60 seconds, it has a lot of the same kind of critiques about rock and roll as these other clips had as well. Okay, so once you have watched those videos, think about what was the danger with music and rock and roll. What made people upset? And here we go back to our idea of fears, cultural fears coming from some adults. So, rock and roll is associated with several things, including rebellious teenagers straying away from norms such as modesty and moving toward vulgarity. So, you see people dancing, and I know to us that dancing probably doesn't seem that controversial or sexual, but the dancing would be very different in the 50s and 60s for teenagers compared to how their parents would dance. So you see a lot of people dancing in ways that would be considered vulgar. You see it connected very closely with premarital sex or dangerous sex and also drugs. Another thing is actually at this time, it would be hard not to see the racial tensions and racism coming out in these clips and in some of the ideas associated with rock and roll. So, music in the 50s and 60s and rock and roll obviously has some origins in specifically um, African American music. So, in some ways they are the ones who birth this genre, that create this genre. And then you also see a lot of black individuals who are participating in this genre. Remember that we still have segregation at this time. So you see things like interracial bands and groups. So the International Sweethearts of Rhythm, the Equals, the Del Vikings, the Marcells, these are all interracial groups. You also see this breakdown of segregation specifically centered around music, because to a certain extent, younger people just want to go to a club and dance. They don't care necessarily about some of the racial tensions or racial beliefs that their parents have. So they saw this as a breaking down of these boundaries and segregation centered around music, music and dancing and coming together with this. So there are major cultural changes happening at this time. And then I just have a short trailer from a movie called Blackboard Jungle, which was released in 1955. And this is actually showing a desegregated or an integrated school, which again, we're right in the thick of civil rights movement, or like at this moment, we're kind of ramping up to 50s and 60s, a very tense time period. And then you also see in this film teenagers rebelling against authority and norms. And it used rock and roll as a soundtrack in a way that's extremely experimental for the time. So think of all the movies that use modern music now in order to, like Deadpool and Suicide Squad and many others, like action films. You have like certain like rock and roll or modern music. This was actually very experimental in the 50s. So it brings together all of these cultural issues as well as to a rock and roll background soundtrack. And again, that's just basically the trailer for it for you to get a sense of it. So I'm also interested in discussing the ways that this extends into modern times. So sometimes we think of, oh, music used to be great, and this might be for older people, not necessarily you, but music used to mean something, music used to be great, and then now it's just all crap, essentially. like terrible. But I do think that we see this happen again, where music is at the center of a cultural tension. So we have punk music of the 80s. If you're a fan of that, it's a very similar thing to the rock and roll in the 50s and 60s. We also have in more modern times Marilyn Manson, which, if you don't know who he is a shock rock artist, and I will link you to one of his music videos. But he is a shock rock artist who's known for kind of pushing boundaries, challenging things, going against social norms. And he is at the center of Can Music Cause Violence? That discussion. And he is famously blamed for the Columbine school shooting, which was a tragedy that happened in 1999 and is considered the kind of start or the major school shooting that kind of ushered in the next 20 years or so of school shootings. So he's famously blamed for it because there is an allegation that the shooters listened to his music and possibly became violent because of that. So the next slide has a video where Marilyn Manson discusses being blamed for a high school shooting. And of course, again, this touches on the discussion that we still have today, that can music cause violence? Can music cause you to be a bad person? Can it be a bad influence on people? So here's the video, and again, you can watch that. Just pause the video and watch this, or watch it afterward. And then there's also, I think that we can also talk about rap music as an equivalent genre that's very popular but also controversial. So, thinking about rap music, Eminem was the top artist of the decade from 2000 to 2010. Today, we have just a lot of different either rappers or R&B artist or urban artist or hip hop artist, all different genres, but sometimes gets painted with the same brush. But it's an extremely popular genre, especially for younger people, teenagers to 30-year-olds, essentially. And like, what do people say about rap music? What does rap or hip hop allegedly promote? And there are always discussions that rap or hip hop are a bad influence, that they cause kids to do bad things, that you shouldn't let your kids listen to it. And yeah, and I kind of just like, how do you feel about that? Can this be the equivalent of rock and roll in the 50s and 60s? Elvis being banned because he's too vulgar. So, to continue this idea, I have a couple of clips. This is a news clip where is hip hop culture ruining our youth and community? It's just a short clip of them talking about that subject matter. And then I have a Jon Stewart clip who's talking about or making fun of the idea that listening to hip hop can make you say racial slurs or make you racist. So that's an interesting news clip as well. So a couple of different clips, and again, I just want you to think about, what do you think about this? Is rap music similar to other musical controversies? Can we somehow work twerking in here? Because there's also like dance and music seems to go hand in hand. And again, people were a little bit like, even in the 50s and 60s, it was centered around rock music makes you dance in vulgar ways. And on a more personal level, did you have music you couldn't listen to? Are there other examples in contemporary culture that I'm not even thinking of? So these are the things that I want you to keep in mind as we ask ourselves these questions for the next, well, really for the rest of the semester. Why is art or other forms of self-expression, fiction, music, dancing, considered so dangerous that we do have this lengthy history of banning it, censoring it, or blaming it for the wrong in the world? Is it true that it no longer happens? Thinking about Beyonce, Dixie Chicks, Eminem, Marilyn Manson. Maybe we can throw Miley Cyrus in there. So, is there any music now that people try to censor or keep kids from listening to? And do you agree or disagree with that? And again, going back to the central question is, what role does art play in our world, and what role should it play or can it play? which I think is actually an interesting discussion, even thinking about COVID-19. So again, which we'll discuss that further. We have a slightly tinged COVID-19 discussion board coming up. Anyway, so if you have any questions, let me know. If you're having trouble getting any of the videos to play, let me know. If not, until next time.